Two brothers, Romanian archaeologist Ionel and geologist Radu, inherit their grandfather's coded journal referencing a hidden chamber deep within the Apuseni Mountains. Locals speak of an obsidian altar sealed beneath centuries of rock, marked with symbols written in what looks like blood. When they discover a bronze key among their grandfather's effects and match it to cryptic references in his notes, the brothers make a decision that will test their bond, their courage, and everything they thought they knew about their family's past. What lies beneath decades of stone and shadow? Why did their grandfather spend 40 years searching? And why did he stop just before revealing the truth? Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The journal arrived wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with a wax stamp neither brother recognized. Ionel, 34, held it in the dim light of their grandmother's parlor while dust motes drifted past the shuttered windows. The leather was soft from age, worn at the spine. His grandfather, Alexandru, a man Ionel had met only twice before his death, had kept this hidden for 6 decades. Radu stood by the fireplace, 30 years old, skeptical as always. "Another old man's obsession," he said, though his eyes were fixed on the journal. "Grandfather talked about caves until the day he died. Nobody found anything." Ionel opened to a marked page. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural, sketches of rock formations, measurements in faded pencil, and beside them words in Romanian. The obsidian speaks, the altar waits, blood-marked, but not cursed, preserved. He was an engineer, Ionel said quietly. He wouldn't waste 40 years on fantasy. Below the text lay a small object wrapped separately, a bronze key, green with patina, no longer than a thumb. Its head was cast in the shape of an eagle, wings spread. No lock they'd ever seen matched such a design. Radu crossed the room and took the key from his brother's palm. It was heavier than it looked. "Where?" "Apuseni Mountains, north face. There are coordinates." Ionel pointed to a series of numbers written in the margin, alongside a warning in their grandfather's hand. "Do not attempt alone. Do not tell the locals. They fear what sleeps." "What sleeps?" Radu's voice carried both mockery and something else, a thread of unease. Ionel turned the page. A photograph, water-stained and nearly black with age, showed a younger Alexandru standing before a rock wall. Behind him, barely visible in shadow, was an opening in the stone. His hand rested on it protectively, possessively. "We go next week," Ionel said. "We bring ropes, lights, documentation equipment. We follow his coordinates exactly." Radu turned the key over in his hands, watching light catch its tarnished surface. Outside, the Romanian autumn pressed against the windows, wind in the pines, the smell of rain on stone. He thought of their grandfather, a man who'd spent his life searching for something he never spoke of, a man who died at 82, still muttering coordinates in his fever dreams. "If there's nothing," Radu said finally, "we sell the journal. Collectors pay well for this kind of thing." Ionel didn't answer. He was studying the final pages, sketches of symbols, strange and angular, etched into what looked like a stone surface. Beside each symbol, Alexandru had written a single word. Not an explanation, a warning, witness, remember, survive. The brothers exchanged a glance. Neither spoke, but both understood. They were going to the mountains. Chapter 2. The Ascent. The mountains welcomed them with cold. October in the Apuseni carved wind through the valleys, and the higher they climbed, the thinner the air became. Janil carried the surveying equipment and the journal. Radu hauled the rope, flashlights and climbing gear, his geologist's eye already cataloguing the rock faces they passed. Limestone beds, quartz veins, granite intrusions that had thrust upward millions of years ago. They'd told no one. In the small village below, an old woman at the market had stopped Radu when he bought supplies. "You go to the mountain?" she'd asked in Romanian, so thick with mountain dialect it took him a moment to pass it. "Research," he'd said. Then you are careful, she'd replied, not a question. She'd wrapped his bread without meeting his eyes. The coordinates led them to the north face, where the rock formations became increasingly wild, jagged, twisted, as if the earth had convulsed and frozen mid-seizure. Ionel consulted the journal every 100 meters, matching written descriptions to actual terrain. A split boulder shaped like a dove, a waterfall frozen mid-cascade by limestone deposits, a standing stone marked with what might have been ancient tool marks, or perhaps something else, deliberate carvings worn smooth by centuries of weather. By afternoon, they found it, a narrow gap between two massive rock faces, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. But Alexandru's photograph, taken from this exact vantage point, showed what lay beyond. A crack in the earth that opened downward into shadow. Radu secured the rope to a stone outcropping, testing it twice before trusting his weight. "This is insane," he said, though he was already fastening his harness. "If this opens to anything real, if there's anything down there we call the Institute, we get proper archaeology teams." "We see first," Ionel said. "We understand what he found." The descent took 20 minutes. The walls on either side were smooth, worn by underground water that hadn't flowed here in perhaps centuries. The air changed as they dropped, colder, damper, carrying the mineral smell of deep stone and something else, a faint metallic tang that made both brothers' breathing quicken. Their flashlights caught the floor first. A chamber, roughly circular, about 40 meters across, and there, centered in the beam of light, what their grandfather had been searching for, an altar, black stone, obsidian, definitely obsidian, volcanic glass that shouldn't exist in these mountains, but clearly did. It was roughly carved, ancient beyond reckoning, its surface worn smooth by unknown hands, and covering every inch of its face, inscriptions. Radu descended the final meters and touched the stone, cold, older than memory. The inscriptions weren't made in blood. That was immediately clear to Ionel's trained eye. But they were red, deep crimson, the color of iron oxide, minerals ground into the obsidian itself centuries ago. The symbols matched those in their grandfather's journal exactly. "He knew," Radu whispered. "He'd been here. He documented this, and he never told anyone." Ionel's flashlight moved across the wall behind the altar. There, barely visible, was a small opening, rectangular, deliberately carved. And beside it, still wedged in the stone, after what might have been centuries, a bronze lock eagle-headed waiting. Their grandfather had sealed this chamber and left the key for them to find. Chapter 3. The lock. The bronze was corroded but intact. Radu used a soft brush to clear the mineral deposits, revealing the fine craftwork beneath. An eagle with feathered details still visible, talons extended. The lock's mechanism was simple by modern standards but elegant, a single shaft keyed. Ionel produced the key. His hands were steady, but his pulse wasn't. "If this opens," Radu said, "everything changes. Everything grandfather kept secret opens," Ionel finished. The key slid into the lock like it had been made for it. No resistance, no rust seizing the mechanism. Someone, Alexandru certainly, had maintained it over decades, oiling it, preserving it, waiting. The key turned with a soft, precise click. The stone panels swung inward on hinges that were impossibly still functional, revealing darkness beyond. A chamber within the chamber. Something inside caught the flashlight beam and threw it back in fragmented reflections. Metal, lots of metal. Radu was already reaching into the opening, his geologist's training overridden by simple human curiosity. His fingers touched something smooth, cylindrical, encrusted with verdigris. A coin, then another. The beam of the flashlight swept across dozens of them, spilling from a rotted wooden chest that had surrendered to time. Ottoman mint marks, Byzantine symbols, currency from eras that should have been forgotten. Silver, Radu breathed. 15th century at least. These are Ionel. These are priceless. Uday, but Ionel wasn't looking at the coins. Behind them, deeper in the chamber, something else caught his eye. Documents preserved in sealed bronze cylinders, and beside them, a leather-bound book. Not ancient, recent, perhaps 50 years old. Another journal. In their grandfather's hand, the stone altar, the locked chamber, the obsidian inscriptions. All of it suddenly felt less like an archaeological discovery and more like a message Alexandru had spent 4 decades preparing, waiting, finally trusting them to find. Ionel opened the journal, and the first line made his breath catch. If you are reading this, I am dead, and you have proven yourself worthy. The treasure is nothing. The truth is everything. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, Ionel said aloud, the words feeling strange in the stone chamber, but necessary, a promise to those who would see this eventually. Radu looked at his brother. What did you just say? Later, Ionel replied. First, we need to know what grandfather was protecting. Chapter 4. The Truth in Shadow. Alexandru's second journal was meticulous, pages filled with dates, sketches, historical references, and a narrative that rewrote everything the brothers thought they knew about their grandfather. He had not been a crazed historian chasing phantoms. He had been a man protecting a secret that was never meant to be forgotten, but neither was it safe to speak aloud. The obsidian altar, he wrote, was not discovered by him. It had been discovered by their great-great-grandfather, Nikolai, in 1884 during construction of a mine tunnel for iron ore extraction. Nikolai, a mining engineer working for the Austro-Hungarian administration, had kept the discovery silent, but not from ignorance, from duty. The inscriptions carved into the obsidian, Alexandru explained, were not ancient. They were from the 17th century, created by a monk named Brother Augustine. The blood was not literal blood. It was ochre, iron oxide mixed with water, applied ceremonially and allowed to dry. The symbols were a warning and a record. Beneath this altar lay the documentation of a massacre. During a period of resistance to Austro-Hungarian conscription, a village in the Apuseni had refused to send their sons to the military. The response was swift and brutal. Soldiers arrived at dawn. 237 people were executed, the entire adult population of the settlement. The names and fates of each victim were recorded by the sole surviving witness, Brother Augustine, a monk from a nearby monastery who had been visiting relatives when the soldiers came. Unable to report what he'd seen without risking execution himself, Brother Augustine had carved the record into obsidian, the hardest, most permanent material he could find, and sealed it beneath a false altar, hoping someday, when the world changed, the truth would surface. Nikolai found the evidence, but recognized its danger. Speaking such truths in the late 19th century was a death sentence. His death sentence, and his family's. The Austro-Hungarian Empire did not tolerate historical record-keeping that contradicted official narratives. So he sealed the chamber again, passed the key to his son, and made a pact of silence that would bind the family for generations. Each generation would maintain the secret until the time was right, until the world was ready to hear what had happened in those mountains, until it was safe. Alexandru had spent his life researching the historical records, cross-referencing names carved in the obsidian with Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian archives, with parish records and local folklore. He had verified every name, every death, every lost life. He had even found descendants, people whose grandparents had disappeared during those years, whose families carried stories that official history had erased. "I cannot speak," he'd written in the journal. "The powers that sealed this history are still watching, but I have documented everything. I have prepared the chamber, I have ensured that when the time comes, when the mountains are ready to give up their dead, you will know what to do. The journal ended with a single instruction: show the world, but first survive what comes next. Not everyone wants this history revealed. Some families, some institutions, have spent generations keeping this quiet. They will not welcome the truth. Radu lowered the journal, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. He was protecting us. He was, Ionel agreed, by keeping silent. The coins, they realized now, were not the treasure. They were mere goods, Ottoman-era commerce, material value that meant nothing. The real treasure was documentation, names carved in stone, names written in journals, a historical record of mass death, preserved in secret for over a century. That night, in a camp near the mountain face, Radu asked the question they'd both been avoiding. Who else knows? Who else has been watching? Ionel had no answer. But as he lay in his sleeping bag, listening to wind rattle the tent, he thought he heard something else, the sound of movement on the mountain, distant, patient, waiting. Chapter 5. The Watchers, the next morning, brought visitors. 2 men arrived at their camp just after dawn, moving with the casual confidence of people who knew the terrain well. They carried no climbing gear, no hiking packs. They simply appeared from the mist that clung to the mountainside, their dark clothes and careful demeanor marking them as something other than tourists or fellow researchers. "Good morning," the taller one said in Romanian, his accent placing him from the capital, Bucharest, official. "We heard there were researchers on the mountain. We wanted to introduce ourselves." Ionel recognized the type immediately. Not police, not archaeologists. The way they moved, the way they assessed the camp without appearing to look. Government intelligence or something close to it. "We're conducting a private archaeological survey," Ionel said carefully, "documenting rock formations for a university project." The second man smiled. "Yes, we know. We've been monitoring your movements since you entered the valley 3 days ago. The local authorities notified us. Foreigners in the mountains always require verification." "We're not foreigners," Radu interjected. "We're Romanian citizens." "Of course," the first man agreed. "But you're on government-protected land. There are restrictions. Certain areas aren't open to civilian research without permits from the Ministry of Culture." Ionel felt his pulse quicken. They knew, or they suspected. The question was how much. "We have no issue obtaining permits," Ionel said smoothly. "If we've violated regulations, we can descend immediately and file the proper paperwork." The men exchanged a glance. "That won't be necessary, not yet, but we would like to see what you found in the chamber. We've received reports that you've been conducting excavations in an unauthorized cave system." Radu's jaw tightened. "We found an empty chamber, archaeological documentation only. Nothing valuable." "Show us," the first man said. It wasn't a request. The brothers had minutes to make a decision. They could comply, lead the men to the chamber, and risk having the entire discovery confiscated and buried again. Or they could refuse and trigger an official investigation that would expose everything. Ionel made his choice. "We need to pack equipment safely. It will take an hour. If you want to wait at camp, we can show you what we've found." The men settled themselves, watching with patient intensity. Radu immediately began dismantling their camp, moving with purpose, while Ionel worked quickly to photograph every page of Alexandru's journals. His hands shook as he captured images on his camera, uploading them to a cloud storage account on his phone the moment signal appeared. When everything was documented and backed up remotely, Ionel led the men to the chamber. Chapter 6. The Descent. The chamber revealed itself gradually to the government men as flashlight beams cut through the darkness. The obsidian altar emerged from shadow like a dark heart beating in the mountain's chest. The inscriptions caught the light, and for a moment neither visitor spoke. "Remarkable," the taller man finally said. "How long have you known about this?" "We found the chamber yesterday," Ionel replied. It was mostly true. The second man was already photographing everything with a professional camera, not documenting, but cataloguing, recording, claiming. "This falls under protected archaeological heritage," the first man said. "Everything here will need to be reported to the ministry immediately. You've done good work, but you understand this is now an official matter." "Of course," Ionel said. He and Radu had already discussed this possibility. The photographs were safe. Alexandru's journals, the originals, were in their backpack, concealed in a waterproof case. The men spent 30 minutes in the chamber, photographing the altar, the lock, the bronze cylinders. They said nothing about the obsidian's inscriptions, though Ionel saw them studying the symbols carefully. "They took the coins for inventory," they explained, and sealed the inner chamber with an official padlock. "This site is now under government protection," the taller man announced. "You are to report to the Regional Archaeology Office within 48 hours with a full statement. You will not return to this location without authorization. Is this clear?" "Clear," Ionel agreed. As the men prepared to leave, the second one paused. "Your grandfather was Alexandru Popescu, wasn't he? The engineer?" Ionel's blood went cold. "Yes. How did you—" "We have records. He was on a restricted list for many years. Questions about nationalist activities during the Cold War. His file was never fully cleared." The man smiled thinly. "I'm glad you've brought this to the authorities' attention properly, much better than what some families do, try to hide history." After they left, Radu slumped against the rock wall. "They're going to confiscate everything, seal it away. It will disappear again." "No," Ionel said quietly. "It won't, because we have photographs, we have his journals, and now the world will know." He pulled out his phone and began composing an email to journalists, historians, and academic institutions. Not everything, not yet, but enough to create documentation that would be harder to suppress. "If this treasure hunt already has you hooked," Ionel said aloud, still following the promise he'd made to unseen audiences, "hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light." Radu stared at his brother. "What are you doing?" "Protecting history," Ionel replied, "the way grandfather should have been able to." Chapter 7. The Pressure. Within 3 days, the pressure began. Government officials arrived at Ionel's apartment in Cluj-Napoca, requesting interviews. His university position came under sudden scrutiny. Questions about the permits, the funding sources, whether proper channels had been followed. Radu's geological survey work was similarly examined. Meanwhile, Ionel received subtle threats, not direct, nothing that could be prosecuted, but clear enough. A pipe burst in his apartment building's water system, coincidentally flooding only his unit. His car's tires were repeatedly slashed. Strangers began appearing near his workplace, watching, photographing him. The emails he'd sent to historians and journalists had vanished into silence, apparently filtered by government servers or simply ignored. The academic community, it seemed, had learned caution decades ago. No one wanted to touch a story this politically sensitive, but there was one outlet that couldn't be silenced so easily: social media. Ionel created an anonymous account and began posting photographs of Alexandru's journals, carefully selected pages that told the story without revealing everything. The obsidian altar, the inscriptions, the names of the victims, the Ottoman coins as evidence of the chamber's historical significance. The posts gained traction faster than he expected. Within days, they'd been shared thousands of times. Journalists began investigating independently. Descendants of the massacre's victims came forward, family stories that had been passed down, whispered in the dark, now finally finding voice. The government's response was to escalate. Radu was detained for questioning at a police station, held for 36 hours without formal charges. When he was released, he was shaken in a way Ionel had never seen before. "They know we're still investigating," Radu said, his voice flat. "They wanted to make sure I understood the consequences of continuing. Then we stop," Ionel said, though it tasted like betrayal. "No," Radu replied, "we don't. Because if we stop, grandfather's silence wins. And those names, those 237 names carved in obsidian, they stay forgotten. I won't let that happen." That night, Ionel received a call from a historian named Dr. Mircea Popescu, no relation but sympathetic to their cause. The man had been following the social media posts and had begun his own independent verification of the historical records. "What you've found is real," Dr. Mircea said quietly. "I've cross-referenced the names with Turkish and Austrian archives. The massacre happened. There's documentation. The government has known about this for years. It's in the classified historical files. They've been suppressing it because acknowledging it would require reparations, would require historical narrative changes, would create political complications with neighboring countries. So the government will never allow the truth out," Ionel said. "The government won't," Dr. Mircea agreed. "But the truth is too big now. It's escaped containment. I'm organizing a symposium, an international academic conference on Romanian historical suppression. We're inviting scholars from across Europe. We're going to make this public in a way they can't bury. And we need your testimony, your photographs, your grandfather's journals." Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The symposium took place in a university lecture hall in Vienna, safely outside Romanian government control. Ionel testified for 3 hours, presenting the photographs, the journals, the documented verification of the massacre and its systematic erasure from official history. The response was overwhelming. International media descended on the story. Historians began publishing peer-reviewed papers. The descendants of the massacre's victims found each other through the emerging public record and began organizing for official recognition and memorial. The Romanian government initially denied everything, then claimed the documents were forgeries, then finally, when the international pressure became impossible to resist, admitted that yes, there had been an incident during the 17th century that had been historically underexplored. They didn't acknowledge the massacre. They called it an administrative action. They didn't apologize. They commissioned a review of historical records, but the seal had been broken. The truth, once exposed, could not be recontained. The obsidian altar was declared a protected historical monument. A museum was established at the site, carefully structured to tell the full story, with archaeological teams documenting every detail, every inscription, every name. Ionel and Radu were awarded the European Historical Documentation Prize. Their grandfathers' journals were published in full, translated into a dozen languages. But there was a cost. Ionel was effectively blacklisted from academic work in Romania. His career in his home country was over. Radu received constant harassment, both official and unofficial. Family members distanced themselves, afraid of association with the controversy. One evening, standing at the edge of the Apuseni Mountains, watching mist gather in the valleys, Radu asked, "Was it worth it?" Ionel thought of the 237 names carved in obsidian. He thought of Alexandru, spending 40 years maintaining a secret, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it aloud. "Yes," he said quietly, "it was worth it." The mountain wind carried the sound of water far below, underground streams, hidden rivers, the earth keeping its own counsel. But the altar no longer guarded its secret alone. The truth had been claimed by daylight, by history, by the people who had finally learned what had happened to their ancestors. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years later, A memorial stood on the mountain face, not a grand monument, but something more fitting, a stone marker with the names of all 237 victims carved into it, visible and permanent. Each year, descendants of the massacre's survivors gathered there to remember. Each year, the story became more real, more integrated into the historical record, more impossible to suppress. Alexandru's journals became a textbook in universities across Europe, studied as an example of both courage and the personal costs of historical truth-telling. The coins were carefully catalogued and displayed in museums, their provenance explained and contextualized. Ionel eventually emigrated to Austria, where he established the Center for Suppressed Historical Documentation, an organization dedicated to uncovering and verifying histories that governments had tried to erase. He worked with Radu, who had become a consulting geologist for archaeological expeditions across Eastern Europe. The obsidian altar remained in its chamber, protected and preserved, no longer a secret but a monument. Visitors could descend into the mountain and see it, read the inscriptions, understand what it meant to resist forgetting. On the anniversary of the memorial's dedication, Ionel returned to the chamber one last time. He stood before the altar in the light of his flashlight, and he thought of Alexandru, not the young engineer who had sealed the secret in 1884, but the old man who had died carrying its weight, trusting that someday his grandsons would be strong enough to bear it. "I understand now," Ionel said aloud in the stone chamber. "You didn't keep quiet because you were afraid. You kept quiet because you were waiting for the world to change enough that the truth could survive being spoken." The obsidian reflected his voice back at him, silent and eternal. And somewhere in the Vienna archives, in museums and universities across Europe, in the memory of descendants who now knew their family's true history, Alexandru's vigil finally ended. The dead were remembered. The truth was recorded. The mountains had given up their secret and in doing so had set two brothers free. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.